The International Association for Near-Death Studies presents NDE Radio, a weekly exploration of near-death experiences and similar encounters with the other side. Now, here's your host, Lee Witting.
Welcome to NDE Radio. I'm your host, Lee Witting.
Our guest today, Colin Thomas Perry, PhD, is a writer and lecturer in media studies who lives and works in Melbourne, Australia. In 2008, at age 49, he suffered a heart attack and had an NDE in which he met Jesus and angels. His insights into the supernatural following his NDE offer a profound view of life, death, eternity, and the deep questions of human existence. In 2015, Dr. Perry authored Dying to Be Alive, a short book that nevertheless offers a point of view rarely encountered in others' NDEs. Moreover, it's Colin's hope to translate the essential nature of the spiritual realm into the physical world. Colin warns there are spiritual powers of darkness that stand against this knowledge being distributed. Nevertheless, this goal has the potential to change the way you think about NDEs, the soul, and the eternal destiny of humanity. Colin, welcome to NDE Radio.
Hi, Lee. It's very good to be with you.
Oh, it's good to have you here all the way from Australia. Colin, tell the audience a little about your exposure to God and religion as you were growing up.
Yeah, well, look, I was brought up a Christian, although at an unusual small church called the Christadelphians with some unusual beliefs that I sort of deciphered and grew beyond by about the age of 15 and started to be very, very interested in God and reading the Bible and understanding what he was about, and absolutely loved Jesus, the man, the God, the Son of God, and really came to know him and to pray to him quite a lot. But look, it wasn't all smooth sailing, and at that young age in the 1970s, I was also a musician, and it sort of drew me away a little bit. And I was involved in the sort of the drug culture for a while, I guess, in the 70s. But still believed in God throughout, and was torn between two worlds, I guess, at that point in time.
Mm. And you've kept up with your music, haven't you? Except it's more blues than rock at this point.
Yes, yeah. I do. You find my blues music up on Spotify and Apple Music and places like that under Colin Perry. So yeah, I still keep playing the blues, and I love playing guitar.
Oh, excellent! Do you have an album out?
Yeah, look, there's a 5-track EP on Spotify and Apple Music called Spirit Blue. So if anyone's interested in having a listen, it's up there.
Oh, terrific. I didn't know about that. I will look for it. Well, Colin, were you already teaching media classes when in 2008 you had some chest pain?
Yes, indeed I was. I had completed a PhD in media about 7 or 8 years prior to then. And I was lecturing and teaching people how to make film, how to do sound for film, and those sorts of areas. And that was my profession at the time. Yes.
And apparently, you went to the doctor, and she told you to get some rest. She didn't take it too seriously. But then,
that's a little harsh on her. Maybe she gave me the ECG test, where they stick the sensors onto your chest and record your heartbeat and analyze it.
Yes.
And I got back to her probably 4 or 5 days later to see if the results were in, and she said, no, they're not back yet, but just take it easy, which I didn't take all that seriously myself, I think more than her, because I was starting to feel a little bit better by that stage.
And then you decided to do some gardening and encountered one of those, what was it, like a weed whacker where you...
Yeah, weed whacker is what you call it in America.
Yes.
And if your machines over there are anything like ours here, they can be moody. They can be temperamental.
I can never get mine to start either.
So this particular day, of course, I thought, look, I've waited around for a week. The pain seems to have diminished. I feel okay. So I went out and starting this machine, pulling on the cord, pulling on the cable, and it wouldn't start. So I just kept on pulling, trying to get it going. And then suddenly, bang, in my chest. It was like a very large cramp right across my chest. And of course, because I'd been having this pain, I knew instantly what was happening. And what happened then was quite profound in that I heard the voice of God very clearly and very loudly say to me, you are going to die, but I have things for you to do, which was slightly contradictory at the time.
Yes.
Although I was having a heart attack at the time, I looked up and said, well, which one is it, Lord? He just continued to speak to me and said, you need to go inside and pack your bag and call an ambulance right now, which I proceeded to do. And I still think if I had not have acted on that right then, I quite possibly could have died in my backyard, and that would have been the end of the story. So yeah, I did. I went in and packed my clothes into a bag and called the ambulance service. And they were there fairly quickly. Would have been 10, 15 minutes, I guess. They arrived and basically went through the usual procedures. One of the ambulance officers was on his first day, fresh young recruit. So he was treating me as his first patient. Poor man. He, explained to me, we're going to give you nitroglycerol to lower your blood pressure. We're going to give you morphine to also lower your blood pressure, which they did. And loaded me into the ambulance and said, okay, we're off to hospital. And on the way, he said, look, we usually give you a second shot of morphine, 10, 15 minutes after the first one, which they did. And he said, you may feel lightheaded, which I did. And then I just suddenly felt I'm going to pass out. I said, I'm going to pass out. I can feel it coming. And that was it. I passed out into blackness.
And then you said there was something like floating in the darkness, like floating in water.
Yeah, it was very much, I don't know if you've ever closed your eyes underwater and held your breath and just floated in the water. It was a similar sensation. There was no movement, there was no gravity or weight. I felt extremely light. I felt just totally free in many ways. But interestingly, my consciousness changed between that moment and after I had died, because my heart had stopped at that point in time. I wasn't necessarily immediately conscious of the fact of what had happened, but I just found myself in a new state, and I found myself with this floaty, weird, dreamy sensation. And for quite some time I was floating along, and it took a while for me to realize, and I said to myself, I think I've died. I think I'm gone. I'm not in my body. I'm just existing as a spirit. And that realization started to get me concerned, obviously. I was a little bit afraid at that point in time.
Sure.
So as I started to become afraid, I started to sink down. I felt myself falling, just gradually and gently, but I continued to fall, and this made me more afraid. And then I sort of looked down, if there was such a thing, and I sensed a massive, great black abyss beneath me, which was very, very fearful. I really didn't want to go there. And at this point, I, being a believer in God, I just cried out with everything I had, just Jesus, help me, as loud as I could in my mind. I didn't have a voice as such at that point in time. And I just continued to float for a little while, and then from above, a very strong hand just reached out and just grabbed my wrist and pulled me upwards at an enormous rate. I was flying upwards for some period of time. It felt like a couple of minutes, and it felt like we covered an enormous distance in that period of time. And he actually said to me at that point in time, he said to me, you don't want to go down that way, and lifted me up for this quite a long period of time, and then stopped. And I found myself in a cloudy, light sort of environment with a whole group of angelic beings standing around. So there would have been 6 or 7 angelic beings and Jesus himself there.
Was it first his hand that you saw reaching down to you?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, and looked up and saw his face, and then it was whoosh up we went.
And he grabbed you by the shoulder, I think he said.
It's sort of the forearm. He really did grab me by the forearm.
So it felt like physical contact, like he was really lifting you. Yeah, interesting.
Very much so. And we were propelled up at a very, very fast rate. It was not like gravity, but I could just sense that we were traveling through some enormous distances. And at this point, I hadn't realized who this was. So I was just quite shocked and amazed to find myself in this cloudy, quite well lit, dim, cloudy sort of environment. It was like I didn't quite have clear vision, a bit misty. And he just said to me, "You've died. Here you are. And now we have to make a decision. You can, if you wish to, come on with us to be in paradise and stay, or you can go back to your life. The choice, the decision is yours."
Now, you said there were perhaps half a dozen angels around too.
Yes.
And they were they physically larger than you? You said they made you feel small.
Yeah. Look, I was, if we can talk in physical terms, it was like I had a spiritual body. I was lying down in front of them. So I didn't get a very clear height measurement against my height, but I would have estimated they would have been 9 feet in height would be about what I would say. Their physical characteristics, I think it's very important to explain this. Their physical characteristics didn't seem important because it was just being in their presence was such a powerful experience. Because for the first time, I've really understood that it was their mind, their soul, communicating directly to me. And I was feeling their souls, and I was feeling Jesus' soul directly communicating into mine. And we were linked. And this was such a powerful and beautiful experience. It's very hard to explain and describe, but their wisdom and their knowledge was such that I felt like a 2-year-old child in their presence.
Wow.
They were just so profound, just hearing and feeling their thoughts and coming into the proximity of their knowledge was awesome. And never underestimate the power of an angel, my goodness.
Yeah. Were they communicating with you or with one another?
Oh, look, all of the above. Yeah, it was seriously like we were involved in this spiritual matrix. We were all linked together and we could all hear what each other was thinking. And there was no speech. This was just direct soul-to-soul communication. So I could hear their thoughts. They could hear very distinctly, could hear my thoughts. And Jesus was a level above. And I mean, at this stage, I said to him, "Look, who are you?" And he said to me, "I'm the one you call Lord." And there's only one person I call Lord. So at that point, I was just overcome with, my goodness, I am in the presence of Jesus.
Do you think, just to look at that for a second, do you suppose if you'd been Muslim, that he would have said the same thing?
I don't know. I honestly don't know. This was very distinctly Jesus.
Yes. Well, of course I've heard this from other NDEers who are non-Christian who also encounter Jesus. So this is it's just like an intuitive thing then, isn't it? That's who that is.
My belief was very much in Jesus, but interestingly at the time I did not come up and say, "Oh, I'm with Jesus." It wasn't like that. He didn't have it written across his forehead. It wasn't obvious in any way. Apart from the fact that he was very, very distinctly at a higher level than the angels, and he was able to command them and give them instruction and advise them. And that was very obvious in the way they interacted, that they had absolute respect for him and came under his authority in a very gentle way, in a very loving way.
At some point, I think you said he lifted you up to a standing position?
Yeah, there was a point where that happened a little further in once I'd adjusted to the whole environment. And this was after he'd told me who he was, and I was sort of down at his feet, just going, "Oh wow,
yes,
you truly are amazing." And that was the way it felt. And he did lift me up at this point and talk to me about making this decision and what I wanted to do. And at this point, once again, I felt fear coming because of that realization, that reminder that I was dead, that I'd left people behind, that I'd left my children behind. I had a daughter who was heavily brain damaged. And I had an 8-year-old son, a 12-year-old daughter, a 15-year-old daughter, all at home, not knowing their father was dead. And this really did terrify me. And plus, I did not feel I had completed my work for my lifetime. For some reason, I had this sense that my work wasn't done. And I also thought of what God had said to me when I was there. I have things for you to do. And that, I think, was a little nudge, a little reminder that I did have things to complete in my lifetime.
But when you were floating there on your back, you were in complete bliss. And then it was the memory of your responsibilities on earth that caused you to, have a panic attack? It almost sounds like from the book.
Oh, yeah, it was. Very literally, it was. It's just suddenly my earthly consciousness, my earthly memories, I guess, flooded back in, and I just got some context in it and realized I'm dead. I'm not there for my family. I'm not there for anybody. I've left my body. I've left the earth. And yet, that did cause me to panic. And I started to say, look, I'm not finished. I've got my children. I've got things I need to do. There are things that are unfinished, and started to get quite tense. And this was very out of place for them. And they actually started to mentally, spiritually calm me. It was like they all gathered around very quickly and calmed me down and said, no, we can't have that here. We don't have fear in this place. It was pretty much what they said. So
were these the angels that gathered around you and to calm you down?
Absolutely, yeah. And it works. I mean, they were able to calm me down very quickly. And I understood then, look, of course, this is not a fearful place. People are in their presence in bliss is the general emotion and feeling that's in that place. So yes, they put me back into order, and then I did say, look, I do think I do need to go back because of these reasons. I have my children. I have things that I need to finish that I don't feel are done yet.
Right now, right here is where you had an experience or a communication from Jesus that I have not heard from any other NDEer, and it was a warning that if you go back, you tell us.
He said to me, look, if you go back, there is no guarantee that you will come back here again, and that rests on your choices, and it rests on what you do with your life when you go back. He was basically giving me a nice, gentle warning that I still needed to live my life in the right way, in the right manner, to come back to paradise. That it wasn't necessarily just a guaranteed entry for me. Perhaps if I abandoned my faith, perhaps if I lived a terrible lifestyle, I would not be coming back. He made that quite clear to me at that point in time, yes.
So many people who have NDEs and see paradise and experience God's love just assume that that's where they're going when they die, regardless. And this meant the responsibility was in your hands.
Yeah, absolutely.
Did he give you any specific warnings about difficulties you might face or temptations you might face when you came back?
Well, look, he did mention someone. I won't go into details because it is quite personal, but he did mention someone I would meet and someone who could potentially become a risk to me. And look, in some ways, that definitely did come about. I won't go into details because it is quite personal. But,
no, of course.
Yeah,
but he gave you some insight into it wasn't going to be necessarily an easy an easy life for you.
Yeah, he did sort of explain to me that, going back in there, it won't be easy because, you've experienced this and you're going back in there and all those same temptations and all the same physical existence, the heaviness of being on earth would once again be something I would have to grapple with and overcome in my life, as we all do, without even realizing it. And it's not until you leave this life that you realize just how much we do have to grapple with living in this world.
Yes. And then I guess Jesus sent an angel to check out the condition of your body.
The exact words he used were, go and check the vessel, check that the vessel is good. And I saw an angel flying away. And in the distance, I could still see way off in the distance my body lying in the ambulance. And the ambulance officer working on my body, and I saw the angel go down and start to move around my body and look at the whole situation there. And that was when Jesus started to have the conversation with me about what would potentially eventuate if I went back to my life. And look at this point also, the angel eventually came back and said, yes, the vessel is good. But at this point, the most amazing things were happening. Jesus did say to me, look, I need to go into you and do some work. So he was talking about it like surgery.
Yes.
And he said, just let me do this. Let me come into you and do this. And he then actually came into my soul, into my mind, and started to fix things and shift things around. It was very hard to explain, but I could feel him working on me and repairing damage and restoring me, which was the most magnificent sensation, because at that point we were joined. And I could really feel his consciousness and I could really feel his awareness, which I really do struggle to put into words because it was so profound and so universal. At that point, I felt a bit of what he was feeling. And at that point, I actually felt that I could know anything that was happening in the universe at that point in time, and even beyond time, that he just knew all things that were occurring. It was aware of all things that were taking place everywhere. And it was a very overpowering and wonderful experience. And something I've never really felt fully alive since that moment, because I experienced what completion is, what complete unity with Jesus actually is and what it means. And that was nothing compares. Nothing compares to that. That was the high point of my existence by a long shot.
Wow. Now, he was entering your soul, but doing repairs at the same time on your physical body. Is that right?
I believe so. I really don't know the answer to that question. All I knew was that I felt restored. I felt changed. I felt so much better when he had done it. All this time, there was this incredibly powerful sensation of love. I don't know if you remember lying in your mother's arms as a little child and just how warm and loved and nurtured and cherished you felt. And that was the sensation that I had, but far greater, like 100-fold. That there was this beautiful love, this all-encompassing love and acceptance, not only from Jesus and those angels, but I could feel it was a sense of family. It was as if I was with a very large family reunion with all of my relatives, but I couldn't see them, but I could feel them. And it was like I was at home. I felt more at home there than I've ever felt in my life. It was a beautiful feeling.
Wow. And was it then that you asked Jesus about your future or what he wanted you to do?
We did talk about it, and I didn't so much ask as he started talking to me about it and started saying, he wanted me to tell people about what had happened. He wanted me to pass this on. And that was one of the main reasons for me coming back, is what I'm doing exactly right now, was to actually communicate and share this experience and that what was beyond death for people, because it's such a source of fear for people in our lives. And amazingly, this is the most fantastic experience. Was he and the angels? He took the angels aside and was talking about my future and was showing them something. And I sort of was interested and wanted to come and see. And he said, "Don't let him see this." And so I was sort of kept back for a while. But he said, "Okay, come over and look." And it was as if a veil parted, and I was seeing scenes from my future. Just a few glimpses here and there of things that would happen to me later in my life. And it was just amazing to be looking through a veil into the future. And that's when it really started to occur to me that, wow, this is beyond time, that these beings are beyond time. They can see through time. They can just look forward and know what's coming and see into the future. No problem for them. Everyday stuff. But for us, just totally mind-boggling. But for them, that's just the way they are and the way they live.
So when he warned you that it was up to you to do the right things in your life to get back to paradise, he already knew he already knew what the result of your life was going to be, didn't he?
Very much so. Yeah, and look, I won't say it's been an easy journey by any stretch, but what I think it's important to talk about is the sense of coming back to this world and how that felt and how it affected me.
Sure.
So he did send me back and say, go on back down, and I felt myself floating down again, and I felt myself in water again, very much like I was in a swimming pool and rising up. In fact, it was very similar to, I don't know if you've seen that scene in Lord of the Rings movie where Sam Gamgee goes under the water and Frodo pulls him up into the boat, and you can see the beams of sunshine coming from above. And that was the sensation I had when I came into my body. It was like I was emerging from water into this brightness, and then suddenly, bang, I was back in my body. And it felt terrible. There's no other way to. After that beautiful, blissful feeling, that lightness, that freedom that I'd experienced with Jesus and the angels, it was like hitting concrete. I felt heavy. I felt cumbersome. I felt cloudy-headed. It was, partially obviously because of my physical condition, but also just the sense of being back in this world and back in this place was really difficult to cope with. And it was not enjoyable at first.
I think you compared it to being in concrete, which would be quite a contrast to floating in spiritual water. So.
It was. Look, this existence we live in with our physical bodies, this physical earth, is very clumsy compared to what's there. Clumsy, heavy, demanding, it drags us down. Whereas being in that spiritual state is light, floating, freedom. It is beautiful, and love, and being surrounded by love all the time and just thinking, life is good. That was the general sensation of being there. But being in this life is a constant battle. After knowing what it's like to be there, I understand now that this life we are constantly torn and pulled down by forces of darkness and pulled up by forces of light. And it's really our choices as to which forces we align ourselves with and which way we choose to head, upward or downward. That is very much our decisions in life and how we live.
But you felt the potential for corruption simply by being back in your body?
Well, I don't think you can really understand the power of that until you've been away from corruption. And look, it's very interesting reading all of the prophets in the Bible who've been translated to the heavens. Every one of them has said, I'm a man of unclean lips. I feel terrible. I feel guilty. I feel rotten, basically. And in a lot of those visions, it's been to do with an angel coming and giving them something to eat or giving them something to restore them and make them feel worthy in that place. Because just the very fact of humanity, just the very fact of living in this world, when you find yourself there, you feel stained. You feel very inferior and unworthy of being in their presence. And that was very much what I felt.
Now, when you opened your eyes in the ambulance, the EMT was just about to zap you with a defibrillator, wasn't he?
He was standing over me with the pads, with his mouth open and his eyes wide, say, you're back with us. And I was, And I said to him, look, I have been gone for ages. What's happening? And he said, what are you talking about? It's only been a minute. Your heart stopped a minute ago. And I was stunned. I really was stunned, because it felt to me as if I'd been there for at least 20 minutes to half an hour, minimum. And yet time here had only been 60 seconds. So I was obviously very removed from this time frame on planet Earth.
And you told him what you saw, what you'd seen?
Yes. He was, I think the guy was in shock. He was pale as a ghost, and it was his first day as an ambulance operator, so I really do feel for him looking back. And he was just, whoa, okay, all right then, and just didn't know how to respond. And I was without a shirt. He'd ripped my shirt off, and he said to me, I took your shirt off, I threw it down the corner, it was sopping wet. And I felt like I was floating in water. It's very interesting, this fact. And then I said, do you want to toss it back up to me? I need to put my shirt on. And he threw it back up, and I said, hey, this shirt is completely bone dry. And he couldn't believe it. He couldn't believe that the shirt was dry, because he said, when I took this shirt off you, it was wet. It was wringing wet.
Wow.
But now it's dry. So I don't know how to explain that, but something of my experience of being in water had actually physically translated through to how he felt my shirt. So that was an interesting fact.
Yes. And then when you got to the hospital, did you tell them what you'd seen?
I tried. Look, some people are receptive, some are not. And you can tell some just say, oh, how interesting, Dr. Perry. Just lie down and relax. And others were very interested and wanting to hear more about it and telling me other stories that they'd heard from other patients, etc., etc. But there was a variety of receptions.
And did you tell your kids right away? How old were they at that point?
Well, we had like 8, 12, 15 were those kids that were there with me. And I did tell them, and I don't think they knew what to make of the situation. They just saw their father laid out in hospital with tubes and everything emerging from him, and I think they were slightly shocked by what was going on. I don't think they knew what to make of it at all, but they were very interested, obviously, yeah.
And this is also an indication of a miraculous cure, because apparently the stent surgeon said it appeared you'd had angioplasty, but you'd never had.
This was the head cardio doctor in the hospital. He was a very senior medical person, and he came to see me, and he said, I need to explain what happened, because when I had come back, it didn't stop. I would have thought, I'm back on Earth, it all stops. No, it did not stop. I could still hear angels talking to me for some time while I was in hospital. And they were describing things, talking to me. And one of the things they said was, we have healed 3 arteries, but there's one we cannot heal. Don't ask me why. They should be able to heal them all if they wish to, but for some reason they did not heal one artery. And when this cardio doctor came to see me later, he actually said, you appear to be one of those very lucky people who've had a heart attack and regrown arteries around the blockages, because you have had that. We can see that in the scans. And I said, well, no heart attacks that I'm aware of in the past. And it appears that had been restored. So that was quite a fantastic thing in itself.
You said you opened the Bible a number of times and found totally appropriate verses just at random. Tell us a little about that.
Look, that's something I have done in my life on several occasions, just sit down and say, God, what are you trying to tell me? And throw the Bible open and see what verses come up. Well, at this point in time, there was only one sort of verse was coming up, which was verses about being restored from death or raised from the grave. I couldn't escape it. It was weird. Every time I opened the Bible, continually it would open to one of those things. Psalm 16 is one of them. There's the Lazarus story, the resurrection of Christ. 1 Corinthians 15, where he says, grave, where is your sting? All of those, I could not get away from it. No matter how many times I opened the Bible, it would open up to a verse on that subject, which was really reassuring for me at that point in time. It was just God speaking to me and saying, I've got you. I've brought you back and I'm with you. And it was a very comforting feeling.
One of the, I think you said in your book, you say the first verse you opened to was Psalm 30. Oh, Lord, my God, I called on you to help and you healed me. Oh, Lord, you brought me up from the grave. You spared me from going down to the pit, which fits perfectly.
That was the first thing that hit my face.
Your NDE is described right there. It's amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. And going down to the pit was very much what I was feeling and afraid of. Yes.
That description of floating and then sinking reminded me, I think it's the Muslims who say our hearts are weighed against a feather in judgment. And if the scale rises with, the side where your heart is, if it rises, then you're saved. And if it sinks, and that's exactly what, in another medium, not on a scale, but in the water, that's what you were experiencing until you called on Jesus.
Yeah, very, very much so, until I called on Jesus. And that was very much in the forefront of my awareness, that this promise, this covenant, that those who believe in him will be saved, and that's spoken many times by him in the Gospels. He says, believe in me, be baptized, and you will have eternal life. That's a promise he makes. And I certainly saw that at work. And I felt his saving power very literally, in that he literally reached down and grabbed me and saved me and took me to heaven. And that's, although we weren't all the way to heaven, we were outside by some way, but it certainly was the way it worked out for me.
Yeah. Now, we haven't really talked about your daughter, Rebecca, but tell the audience what tragedy befell her but how this, your experience was communicated to her and how she communicated back to you.
Yeah, sure. Rebecca, tragic, very, very sad. Beautiful young girl, blonde hair, blue eyes. She was stunningly alive. And she was hit by a car when she was 7 years old and suffered some very profound brain injury in the area of the brainstem at the back of the brain, which controls all the communication of movement to the body. So virtually all of her movement was taken. She was in a coma for 2 to 3 months, which was terrifying. And she came out of it only really able to function well with her left hand. Was the only thing she could do. She couldn't speak. She could almost mouth words, but not quite. But she could communicate quite well with her hand and with her speech and the intonation of her voice. And we got a very strong sense of she could sign things for yes and no and make signs for different things that she wanted to communicate to us on a fairly simple level. But yeah, after my NDE, I told her, this would be some months afterwards when I was restored and able to see her again. I basically sat and told her, look, Rebecca, I died, I went to heaven, I met with Jesus and the angels, and it was beautiful. And I was telling her about it. And she became extremely excited to start to point to herself and say, me. And I stopped and said, Rebecca, are you telling me you've had that experience also? And she nodded and pointed up, which was her way of saying yes, and was very excited and laughing and just bubbling with joy that I knew what had happened. which was a wonderful moment. It was very beautiful to understand that when she was in a coma for all that time, she was actually in the presence of the Lord.
Yes. What a relief that would be. I mean, when you think of all the suffering that she had experienced in her young life, to know that she had made that connection, and for you to know what that connection was like too. Yes. I mean, what a great moment of communion that must have been.
And it was very helpful. She actually passed away the following year in 2009 from the swine flu, which is very relevant to us at the moment.
Yes,
closely related to COVID. And she was on her deathbed, and I was with her, and just I knew her time was short, and she knew her time was short. And I was able to just look at her and say, Rebecca, you and I both know where you're going and what will happen after you die. And so you don't need to be afraid, because you know how good it is there. You know how much God loves you. You know how much he's going to welcome you to that place. And I could just see her face soften, and she was very much comforted by that thought. And it made it easier for both of us with her passing. It really did.
Yesterday, we were talking a little about your experience and how you felt Jesus' mind enter your mind on the other side, and that has happened to you since, to a certain extent. And I think I raised the mind meld from Star Trek as a possible parallel that people might understand. Talk about that, how that's affected you since you've come back, and also some of the Bible references like the kingdom of God is within you.
Most definitely. Look, I've always believed these things and read them and thought about them and accepted them in principle. But when theory and practice meet and you actually experience the kingdom of heaven firsthand, it's a very, very different kettle of fish. And that is something that has certainly never truly left me since that occasion, since that time. Look, the kingdom of God is within you. The kingdom of heaven is within you. Those were Jesus' words. And I believe very literally that we are, each of us, potentially a portal from heaven to earth if we open ourselves up in that direction. And I believe that is God's will for every human being. I really do. That we can, if you like, channel heaven through us and into the world. And the means by which this happens is love, the power of love, the thing we call love. Now, I'm not talking physical, sensual love of man and woman. This is love of human being to human being, love of people and caring for them and nurturing them. That sort of love is directly reflective of what I experienced there in heaven. And I have many times since then experienced that same sense of love. And it's always involved with helping people, comforting people, feeling unity with people and feeling at one with people. And in a sense, like there's even been times I have felt what people are thinking and been able to say, oh, I know you're thinking this, or I know you're thinking that. Maybe because I'd experienced it there, some of that has stayed. I suspect so. Doesn't make me any better than anybody else, but it's just something I have been able to experience since that time, and it is wonderful.
Right. One of the Bible quotes in your book is John 17:21. I think it's Jesus praying to God that all of them, probably meaning his disciples, might be one, and extending it past the disciples. It's a message to all of us, that all of them might be one, Father, just as you are in me and I am in you. And then another from Paul, 1 Corinthians, it was his explicit promise that we would share in his nature. In order to reach that level of unity, we must learn to surrender our mental processes to his control. And we have the mind of Christ. It's the quote from 1 Corinthians. We have the mind of Christ.
Very much what I have experienced since being back, and I'm absolutely a believer in that. I mean, look, we think about these things in terms of religion and things that have come down through the centuries and traditions that have been taught by the church. But I think it's very interesting to apply that mind meld, that sort of sci-fi communication of minds that you were talking about, because in reality, that's what it is.
Yeah.
We are in telepathic communication with God, and he is in telepathic communication with us via angels, via the Holy Spirit. There is a pathway of communication going on, which is very profound and very deep. Some of us, I think, do recognize it more than others, perhaps because we practice and pray and activate that sort of area of our lives. Some ignore it completely and pretend it's not there. I mean, the most obvious way I think we experience it is through the sensation of love and through what we would call our conscience, knowing what is right and knowing what is wrong, and having a deep feeling of that right and wrong difference. That's the most obvious ways I think we experience it, that his presence is very much alive within us, within our souls.
Do you think the knowledge of that possibility is an additional responsibility laid on us? In other words, if we know that much about the other side, are bad deeds judged harsher because we had that knowledge than someone who's like the prodigal son, just acting out of ignorance and passion until he comes home and realizes the Father's the answer?
It concerns me to hear you say that. Yeah, look, it does say the teachers will be judged more harshly because more is expected. If we know these things, then it is expected of us that we will act in response to them. It's not easy, and sometimes it may feel a bit unfair, but I think it is a fact that people who actually know Jesus, know God, know of his power, do have a responsibility to act on that knowledge and to live our lives accordingly, and to try and communicate that to other people the best that we can. Often, I love what St. Francis, I think it was, said, do you preach the gospel? I think he said something about, I don't do it in words, I don't speak it in words, but I do it every day of my life. That it's my actions that preach the gospel. It's my way of life that shows people what God is. And that, to me, is probably the most powerful way we can live, is to be concentrating on helping others. As Jesus said, if you've cared for even one of these little ones, then you've cared for me. And that is a powerful thought. And those of us who know God and know Jesus really do have a responsibility to help and to be something that other people can rely on and look to.
Here's a question sort of related to the notion of free will and predestination, which is always a challenge. But you say in your book, the Lord and his angels are at work examining and arranging events throughout time. God stands outside of time and can observe and manipulate events throughout all time from a position that is not fixed at any one point in time. Do you think God is changing the past and the future in order to regulate the present?
That is such a complex question, and one that I have dwelt on a lot since my experience. I don't think we can truly hope to understand it in all its fullness, but I don't believe God goes back and alters past history. But what I do believe he does is, through what we are living in the present, he alters the effects of what has happened in the past through time. It's a flow. The things from the past, as we know from our lives when we get older, the things from our past come back to bite us, and they do have an effect on our lives now and how our lives will be lived out in the future. So what we do with it in the present, how we respond to it in the present, I think that's how God works and manipulates and alters outcomes in the long term. That's where the concept of forgiveness is so huge, in that people can punish themselves for their pasts But God encourages us to accept his forgiveness and his love, and to have that attitude to ourselves, that we are forgiven, that we are loved, and our actions will change, and that will in turn alter how our futures are worked out.
You also said something I thought was very profound. God works at the level of small human choices that bring about massive global changes.
Yeah.
Talk about that a little. Give us an example.
Oh, well, I think, look, it only takes a spark to light a fire. I think that the small things that happen, I think that a humble carpenter in Nazareth 2,000 years ago who met with a bunch of fishermen and other outcasts has totally turned the world on its head in 2,000 years. The amount of change that has been brought about by his teaching is immeasurable. In the concept of forgiveness, I mean, it's come right through our legal system, rather than the Roman concept of justice, which was rather direct and rather brutal. All sorts of ways in our lives and in our society have been shaped by this one little movement in Israel in 30 AD. That's a sort of example in the extreme of how things happen, but our actions affect others. If we do good to others, they will in turn tend to do good to other people as well. It's like a wave that goes out from us. And that is how I see God working, through individuals and through groups of people who do what is good, what is right, and it flows on and flows through to affecting many people and changes the destiny of the earth, I think, in the long run.
Just to let people know that the Bible is not the only document you read. You mentioned in your book the Sefer Yetzirah, which is an ancient Hebrew text. Tell us a little about that.
Sure. Look, I absolutely do see the Bible as the Word of God. I need to make that very, very straight and very plain. But I also recognize that the Bible had a background and a history prior to Moses, and that there were other documents and other teachings, I guess, that came and flowed through. And there's a whole verbal tradition that goes along with Judaism. And the Sefer Yetzirah is one of the books that's supposed to be written by Abraham, a very interesting book that works through basically the process of the Hebrew alphabet and its meanings, and the meanings of the letters and the words of the alphabet and their relationship to God. And the name of God, Yahweh, which is very powerful. And in fact, Abraham, in the Bible and in the writings, it says he called on God, he called on the name of God. And God would come and meet with him and communicate with him and share with him. And this is the sort of knowledge that he passed to his children, to his children, to his children, and was passed down through the generations. Not free for everybody to know, but certainly the rabbis were trained in it, and continues on to this day. However, I think it's somewhat changed over the thousands of years. But the real point of interest I found in the Sefer Yetzirah was Abraham talking about the levels, the dimensions of heaven, and talking about how it was separated into three heavens above us. And the Apostle Paul talks about this also. And that there are layers overlapping, the layer we live in, which is our world. And then there's the layer of the angels overlapping and above that. Then there's a layer of archangels above that. Then there's what we call the throne room, sitting at the top of this hierarchy. And this is what Jacob's ladder was all about in the book of Genesis. And Jesus referred to it also, the angels ascending and descending upon the Son of Man. And that's the sort of arrangement that I've come to understand through this reading and this prayer and meditation, that there is indeed like a layer cake of dimensions or heavens above us, with God seated above the heavens.
We're just about out of time, Colin, but in our conversation earlier, you'd said that Jesus had given you some glimpses of the future. Talk a little about the prophecy that you've been gifted with.
Yeah. I saw a very clear vision of large tidal waves, very large tidal waves coming towards me. And I had this dream, probably recurring dream 3 or 4 times. And I asked God to explain to me what it was about. And there was a series of waves. They were enormous. And yet when they came to me, they ended up just as nothing more than froth at my feet. And I really wanted to know the meaning of this. And God just spoke to me one day and said, this is the waves that will come upon the earth. He said, there is the wave of pestilence. And this was said at the start of COVID. He said, this is a wave of pestilence that will hit the earth, and it will be followed by a wave of warfare that will come over the whole earth. And he also then said that will be followed by a wave of natural disasters, the like of which we have never seen, that will totally shake the earth. And that was very much what he was expressing to me and saying, this is what's coming. It will be wave after wave after wave. And that's a pretty concerning thought. And yet, at the end of it, we have the establishment of a righteous kingdom on earth. That is the promise. So that's what we are looking forward to, a heavenly kingdom on earth.
Wow. Well, Colin, thank you so much. We are indeed out of time, but tell folks how they can find your book, Dying to Be Alive.
Sure. Well, look, if you just do a search on C. Thomas Perry, Dying to Be Alive, it will come up. It's in Amazon. It's in Barnes and Noble. It's in a lot of different bookstores. So it's pretty easy to find. I would advise you to get the e-copy. It's a lot cheaper than the paperback, a lot more accessible. But yeah, look, a simple online search for Dying to Be Alive, C. Thomas Perry, and that will come up.
Thank you, Colin. This has been really an exceptional program, and I thank you for it. If listeners would like to hear this show again, or any of our more than 400 archived NDE interviews, go to TalkZone's NDE Radio site and hit the Past Shows button, or subscribe to our YouTube channel, NDE Radio with Lee Witting, where you can listen and comment on the complete NDE Radio library. And be sure to like, follow, and share our new NDE Radio Facebook page, and discover our Facebook group and links to our YouTube channel while you're there. Just search NDE Radio with Lee Witting on your Facebook app with your desktop or mobile device. And listen again next Monday, 11 a.m. Eastern at TalkZone for more NDE Radio. I'm your host, Lee Witting, saying thanks for listening.